I will try to share a few ideas with you and of what I've seen over the years. This is the title that I gave to the folks here at Expo about what I would talk about. And I think there are a few people in the room who know who I am, and so they, I think, were quite sure that this was simply a rehash of, and a few Red Sox fans, good. A rehash of 1967 when the Red Sox went from last place to first place, and therefore I was going to talk about how the Red Sox were going to, no, that's not what I'm talking about. I want to talk about impossible dreams for cities, because I really do believe that it's vital that we have people, and you're some of those people, who think continuously about things that just can't possibly happen. They're impractical, they're too expensive, there's some reason why they're really quite terrible things. But we are after, and I know everybody shares this, we are after these kinds of cities that have these qualities. Several of them are quite obvious. Diversity, hospitality are very important to me, that our cities are safe and pleasant places for a wide range of people to be, including people that haven't been there before, people who are only here for a little while. And I also want to think about the last two things. I admit, I'm a little unusual on this spectrum. I'm a really happy person in Manhattan. And I know that's not true for everybody, but it's just as important that every city be a fun and engaging place where you would like to come downtown, you would like to go to the neighborhood center, you would like to be at the entertainment venue that's available. Now, there are a few people just outside the door out there who haven't come into the hall yet, and this is what they say about these dreams. They tell you all the reasons why they can't happen. I am particularly angry about the no money statement. There's plenty of money. There's lots of money. Forget the politics of this statement, but 10, 12 years ago, however long it was ago, when President Bush decided that we should go to war in Iraq, he asked the Congress for $80 billion. And they gave it to him in 24 hours. New money, $80 billion. The entire budget of the Department of Housing and Urban Development last year was $46 billion. Please do not tell me there's no money. It's a question of choices. What will we spend it on? And I honestly believe that's true at every level. It's harder at the local level. It certainly is a little easier at the state level and much easier at the federal level. But please, among the naysayers, here's my answer. You're simply wrong. Now, I've had this great joy. When I was early in my career, this is the kind of thing that I learned about, urban renewal. That was the way to do cities better. We would find the things that were bad, and we'd tear them down, rip them up, and then build something modern, right? So here's a really awful place in Boston. This is Scully Square. You can see from the picture how bad it is, right? I mean, there's a lot of messy businesses around with different kinds of signs, and it looks like that you can't see it so well. There's a lot of people in the street. The streets are being kind of shared by the cars and the horses. It was a long time ago. This was a kind of an active, vibrant neighborhood. Now, it had a couple of not so nice, you know, you could go see a Red movie, and there were some sailors in town that might have had a little bit too much alcoholic beverage, but this was so bad a place that we thought we should tear it down. And here's what we did. We tore it all down. And we built back a vibrant, modern American city. I heard those groans. Any of you who've been to Boston City Hall Plaza know what I'm talking about here. Again, you can't quite see, but there's basically nobody there. This little thing right here is a subway station that really, really, really does look like a bunker. This is the feeling you get in City Hall Plaza. This young man at the place where he's supposed to talk to and negotiate with his city government. And this is the way it feels. He's shorter than we are, but it's the same feeling if you're 6 feet tall. So that was wrong. There are still some things that need changing, I acknowledge, like this. That's a bad thing in a city. That's in Boston, or was in Boston until a little while ago, thanks to all your tax dollars. Thank you very much. This is the scene of the Big Dig before. That's underneath the central artery. Can anybody here imagine that any American city ought to look like that anywhere, anywhere? And in some parts of the world, they're still building this stuff. So I read early on in my career a guy named John McKnight. He's a professor at Northwestern. I commend him to you. He wrote about asset-based planning. And he said, you know what, if you were, remember when there used to be secretaries, people called secretaries in offices? John said, when you go to apply for a job as secretary, you would not say, you know, I don't really type all that well, and I never did learn how to take dictation, and I have a hard time because of the buses getting to work on time, and you know, I sometimes forget to brush my teeth in the morning, but I really need a job as a secretary. Please give me a job. That's what we did in the middle of our century for cities. We asked them to tell us how terrible they were, and then we gave a lot of money to the people who pretty much made them terrible, and guess what they did next? More terrible. So John McKnight taught me about asset-based planning. Think of the best things and make them bigger. And then I read my friend Mark Schuster, who wrote an article to which I commend you called Urban Ephemera, about those temporary events that happen in cities and help define them. And Mark said, look, a better idea for planners is go find the best things about cities, the best people, the best food, the best places, the best music, and let's make more of them. So I pretty much have the best job in the world. And when everybody finds out about my job, no matter how much they love their job, and I wish everybody loved their job, they pretty much agree with me that I have the best job in the world. The Loeb Fellowship is unusual at Harvard because it's not for academics, which is what most of our fellowships are. It's for practitioners, people who are doing stuff about cities every day, and it essentially provides a sabbatical. They get to come there in the middle of their careers after they've demonstrated already that they have some skills and gifts. You've met Ed, you met Kennedy, you're going to meet Jim and Helen this afternoon. There are other people around here. You'll see what these people are like. It's based at the Graduate School of Design, where we typically train architects, landscape architects, urban planners. But you're going to see in a minute that in the fellowship, we understand many, many more people help us think about cities. So while they're there, they build their skills, and I ask them consciously to think about leadership. It's an independent study, so they can do whatever they want to. They can take any course at Harvard, almost any course at Harvard. We haven't had anybody take brain surgery yet. It's probably because it's too simple for the people who are working on cities. So they can also go to MIT. They can take one course, they can take 10 courses, and the deal is you're an auditor, so you don't have to take the exams or write the papers, unless you want to because you think it will make you better, and it's a great exercise to do for you. So I say to them at the beginning of the year, look, there are no real requirements for this fellowship. You don't have to take a certain number of courses. You don't have to write a paper for me examining your experience. You don't have to lead a symposium. It's just one requirement. When you're done and you go back to your job, this is your assignment. Too bad I didn't get quite big enough to laugh. It must be because you've talked to Ed or so, and usually in the beginning of the year, if I say that well, I get a good deal of laughter, and by the end of the year, people know I'm dead serious. And in fact, they do. That's the great joy of my job, is hearing the stories of what they do. So they're great change agents, and I've tried to think they're very different. I've tried to think about a few things that tie them together, and these are three things that I think explain how the fellows make that change. First of all, they're smart. They don't have an idea at a cocktail party and go the next morning and try to start implementing it. There's research, there's facts, there's information. They build that case until they understand it very well. They look hard for win-win solutions that are not just, I can beat you, but you know what, we can do something that's good for you and good for me, and my constituency, what have you. They're very creative. Our fellow, Setu Jones from Minnesota, always says this. He said, the problem with you planners, looking straight at me, is that you approach problems in a straight line. You define the problem, you set out the goals, the objectives, the strengths, the weaknesses, SWOT analysis, et cetera, and you go right at the problem as you've defined it and seen it. Here's the phrase I love. He says, we artists surround a problem. We look at it from a bunch of different directions. This side, that side, up there, downstairs. And because of that, we often find a solution which you too would find if you'd only thought to go at it from that direction. So these fellows are creative in there. Even those who wouldn't define themselves as artists would say this. So they're very smart. They pay attention to the information, the facts, the details. They are strategic. They find good allies. We have a program in Massachusetts called the Community Preservation Act. It's a program which says if you will raise your taxes in your local community by 1% or 2% or 3%, you choose any of those numbers, We, the state, will match that money. Early on, it was dollar for dollar. We're a little poorer now. It's not so much dollar for dollar, but it's some extra money. And once you get that money, you can decide what to do with it. You can spend it on affordable housing, historic preservation, or open space acquisition. We'll give you the money. You've got to set up a committee, and they've got to spend at least 10% on each of those things. And with the other 70%, they can divide it among those three things any way they want to. So the result of that is everybody in those three communities, do you know how much the affordable housing people in Massachusetts talked to the open space people in Massachusetts before this act? Not so much. And the historic preservation people sometimes seemed like our enemy. But because this act got put on the table by a very creative person, we now have this act in place. Millions and millions of dollars have been spent on those three things. And because Bob Keene built this remarkable set of allies that nobody else could think about building, we have some results for all three of these fields. Find some allies. The last thing on this item is also very important, and our fellows understand this incredibly well. Give away the credit. It's not a new idea. You've heard this before. It's amazing what you can accomplish if you don't need to be the person on the stage. And finally, the fellows are passionate. They're relentless. They're like bulldogs. They keep going at it. Over the years, I have learned so much from the fellows that I'm an awful person to meet at a cocktail party, because it doesn't matter what you talk about. If you're talking crazy about something about cities, water. I didn't know anything about water 15 years ago. Today, I can talk your ear off about water, because I've had a couple of fellows who've talked my ear off about water and wouldn't quit, thank God. So they're absolutely relentless. And importantly, again, another thing, they're driven by the mission, not the project. I had this great idea for a housing development right there. You're opposed? You're a bunch of NIMBYs? You're fighting me? Come on, I can fight you and we'll win. Well, maybe there's another way to do the housing that doesn't involve my project getting built there. Maybe there's a voucher program. Maybe there's an assistance program for individual homeowners. Maybe there's another way to do this, because the leaders I know about, especially from the fellowship, are driven by the mission, not the individual project. So we're running out of time, so just a couple of examples. Well, more than a couple, frankly. I'll see how quickly I can get through this. Some of you heard Kennedy Smith yesterday talk about the National Highway Act, $51 billion, and those were the days when $1 billion was actually a significant amount of money, to build these highways all across the system, all across the country. The idea was, in any city, this was a real plan in Washington. Every city will have 6 radials, right, going out from the middle of the city out. Boston didn't have to have 6 because we had an ocean over there. But you have 6 radials, and then you have a circumferential highway at the 10-mile mark, compare with your city, a circumferential highway at the 20-mile mark, and a little circle of things downtown a mile in radius. In Boston, just before this picture was taken, we had the northeast built, the west was built, the southeast was built, but the northwest had stopped at our 10-mile circumferential. We didn't have the inner belt built except for that central artery I showed you. And we didn't have the southwest built at all. And this is a picture of our governor, a Republican governor, stopping those highway projects. You can't do that. That's literally impossible. The federal government is paying 90% of the cost of this thing. Of course you can't stop it. The highway industry, cars, insurance, roads, builders, tires, window shields, those guys all want this to happen. You can't stop that. But a coalition of people, including a couple of Loeb fellows, did stop it. So instead of this, which is what was existing in Boston, this is what we have now. This is a greenway. It's got a little bit of time to go before it gets to be a really great, vibrant downtown space, but it's coming along. There are some projects there. And because it already cleared some land on the Southwest Expressway, which we are now not going to build, we got to build a whole community college on that land. And on the side of that, this is a bike path which goes from the middle of Boston 10 miles out to the edge of the city, covering the orange line extension which was put there. These projects were the invention of a couple of our Loeb fellows. Yes, you can stop the highways. Public buildings, they're always ugly, right? This is a federal office building, and this is pretty much what you get in your city, right? This is a federal office building, very inviting, great life on the street here. Not so much. You really can't change that. This is it. We'd build bunkers with a couple of windows in them. See here? That's the only door to this building, right? Nothing else. Well, how about this? The greenest federal office building in America. Why? Because Bob Peck said, we can get great designers to build great, attractive architecture around our country. This building, I'm sorry, you can't quite see what's going on in here, but instead of all that granite on the ground floor, this is a set of stores in here. So that this building, federal building, activates the street instead of makes it a dull place. That's the federal government. You can't. This is what museums have to look like, right? No, we can build this in San Francisco. Right behind that line of trees is a neighborhood. Because one person, Deborah Frieden, decided she could help the museum find a creative architect. She could help them create a great program. She could work with the neighborhood until they agreed this was a useful thing to have in their neighborhood. She could work finding a contractor and could oversee the construction. This became a life passion for Deborah. And so San Francisco has a great museum here at the De Young, inside spot. This is kind of the way we do housing in our country, right? This is a house on maybe about an acre of land. This is pretty much the way we do things. In Massachusetts, we have 351 cities and towns. That means we have 351 different zoning ordinances. The average amount of land you need to build a new house in Massachusetts, you know, every town's ordinance says if you have this much land, you can build one new single-family unit. Boston, it's 15,000 square feet or something like that. The average in Massachusetts, across all 351 cities and towns, is an acre and a half. That's a football field with a house in the middle. So this is pretty much the way you have to do it, right? No, Chester Hartman had a better idea. We could pass something called 40B, which would allow, and trust me, we do not have a progressive legislature in Massachusetts. 40B allows the state, hold on to your seats, to override local zoning when the developer proposes to build some affordable housing if you don't already have 10% affordable housing in your town. So this is a development that is about 6 times as dense as the zoning ordinance in this town allows. You can't quite see it, but back here there's some more houses quite close by. This is 3 units of affordable housing. What it looks like is a New England farmhouse. But with good design and the ability to be more dense so that you can make the economics work, we can do affordable housing thanks to somebody with a clever idea. Busing in Boston. You remember busing in Boston? This is a famous, iconic picture of what happened on the Boston Common, or the Boston City Hall Plaza in the midst of that crisis. Ted Landsmark, today is the president of Boston Architectural College. In an environment like this, you certainly can't make one of the best movies ever made about the civil rights movement in America. You won't find the support, you won't find the tolerance for that, will you? Not possible. Henry Hampton didn't believe that. Eyes on the Prize is perhaps the best story told about the American civil rights movement ever, and he told it in a very fascinating, interesting way. This is LA. This is a Friday night at 5. The town's deserted. Everybody's hopping their car and on their way home. This is the Disney Concert Center. You can't get people to stay downtown on Friday night in LA. They're going to go to the nightclub. They're going to go someplace. They're going to go home. They won't stay downtown, and certainly not in a kind of a dead place like this, until Josephine Ramirez invented Dance LA. Come tonight and learn the salsa, and we'll play music for you for a couple hours. Come 2 weeks from now, you can learn the tango and dance for a couple of hours. And so the audiences and the people and the stores and the movie theaters and the bars all got much healthier in downtown Los Angeles because of Josephine's ideas. This is the inevitable housing pattern in America. This is what we citizens want. This is what the builders want to do. This is obviously what's going to happen. You can't change that. They did in Portland, Oregon, and the rest of Oregon, where Statute 100 says you have to have an urban growth boundary around every city. That was an alliance of urbanists, farmers, and foresters, because that farm is going to stay there, unlike the one we saw earlier. That forest is going to stay there because it's outside the urban growth boundary. Yes, you can pass those laws. This is Quito, Ecuador. Very dense city, high up in the mountains. Very wonderful downtown, the first downtown ever declared a World Heritage Site by the World Heritage Foundation. Great patrimony, very, very dense. You can't possibly build a subway system in that city. In fact, they are, And in fact, in 3 years, they went from an idea in the mayor's mind to a groundbreaking. That's what the subway looks like underneath that plaza we looked at. And all that's going to look exactly the same, except for a little entrance over here. So we can keep all that patrimony and still make this subway system work. It will cut 2 hours off the average commuting time for 500,000 workers in Quito. Fascinatingly enough, Ramiro even talks about the change it will make for women's rights. Because on those overcrowded buses that are now the only way for working class people to work, women are abused every day. Ramiro cites the fact of the less crowded conditions, the more space that will make it literally safer for women to ride. It isn't just about time, it's about those women. This is not exactly the right picture, but it gives you the feeling of houses in Houston in the 3rd Ward 20 years ago. Rick Lowe saw this house and said, most of us would say, get it out of there, tear it down. Come on, this is a terrible thing for an urban neighborhood. Rick said, you know what, there's a row house underneath there, and the row houses are a really important part of the history of Houston, a part of the history of the black community in Houston. This can be something different. Rick was an artist. He was in a studio painting, and his students said, hey, you're just painting. What are you doing about the real world? You keep talking about this, but you're painting in a studio here. You're not paying attention to real things. So Rick did his Tom Sawyer bit. Said, you know, started working, cutting the kudzu away and the other kind of things. And the kids would wander up and say, what are you doing? What are you doing? Ah, just cutting some grass here. Can we help? Well, if you want to, you know, we're going to pile it over there. And so, would you like to help paint? Yeah, we could paint a little bit. This is Project Row Houses today. There are 23 row houses now repaired. Many of them play a bunch of roles, but I'm particularly fond of the artist studios. These 6 are artist studios. Every 6 months, Rick invites a new round of fellows here to do whatever they would like to with these houses, to paint. You can't tear it down, but you can punch holes in it, you can paint it, you can do whatever you want to. Setu Jones, who I mentioned earlier, surround the problem, he did an interior. Setu's quite interested in collards. So this is a collard green interior for you to think about and the role that collards play in the world. Well, you saw yesterday Aaron Napperstack talk. This is Times Square a little while ago, but because Aaron Napperstack, not a columnist for the New York Times, but a person who started a blog in his bedroom, it got to be a big deal, and he kept talking about creative ways of changing the transportation environment and the city environment in New York. So this is what it looks like in Times Square today. Not because a big, powerful person said this has to be, but because a suggestion floated up that made sense to a person who had the power to make this happen. One last one. I hope I haven't done stealing too much of her thunder. This is London, right? It's a very established city for a very long time. You can see the mix of transportation things here. You can see some wires up here, not so well. This is London. You can't interrupt that. And you certainly can't put that in the middle of the square. What is that exactly? You'll find out later today. What is that exactly, and how come it gets to be in the middle of the square, and what person in their right mind would let the city do that? A person who wanted to excite Londoners, a person who wanted to entertain them, a person who wanted to challenge their idea of what their city was and imagine that it could be something very different. This is clearly impossible. But it happened in London a few years ago. So I say to you that I'm going to quote one last person, then I'm done, and maybe we have a minute or two for questions. One of my Loeb fellows is quite wonderful. I do know that one of the problems with an event like this is you see up here on the stage, present company clearly accepted, a lot of sort of amazing people that have done amazing things, and you wonder in your city about whether you don't feel like you're that amazing, and you're wondering how it is I make something like that happen in my city. Not necessarily exactly the same thing, but something like that. Because I'm not amazing. Actually, you are amazing. My friend Reese Fay talks about the kinds of people you need to make every project work. This is the list. Every organization, every project, every important thing you want to do requires finders, grinders, and minders. The finders are the visionaries. They see the mission. They understand where you need to go. They're the ones with the impossible dreams. The grinders get the work done. They make the phone calls, They make sure the name tags are all taken care of. They make sure everybody comes to the meeting. They arrange for the hall to be open at the right time, and they get the guys with the cameras to be here at the right moment. And then the minders take care of the group. They make sure that everybody's getting a chance to get their 2 cents in. They wonder when Harry hasn't been at a meeting for the last 3 weeks, or when Jane isn't saying anything at all the meetings. They take care of the group, and when something quirky comes up, they let it roll off their backs. And they say, you know, we can really make this work, because that vision is really where we're going. And the fact that we're having a little trouble over here on whether we should have decaf coffee or regular coffee is not the end of the world. We can figure this out. So the deal is, you don't have to be the same thing in every group. You could be a finder in one group and a grinder in another group. You could be the person who puts the bug in the ear of the finder, who feels comfortable standing up on the stage in front of people. You can be the person who gets the work done, because as good as their idea is, it ain't ever going to happen unless somebody makes the phone calls. You can be the person who takes care of the group, forms it, shapes it, makes sure it's diverse enough, makes sure it's big enough. So the short story is, you are one of those people. Because you're in this room, you're a finder or a grinder or a minder or all of those things, which means you can change the world. Thank you very much.